warm welcome to my YouTube channel this evening. We're going to take a close look at what occurred in South Devon during the Second World War. I think you'll find it really interesting, so get a cup of tea and some biscuits on the go, sit back and enjoy the film. All the very best. See you in a while. Cheers. The Second World War arrived in Salcombe and the area of Salcombe around about 1940, when the Air Ministry came and visited the area. They were looking for a large flat piece of ground to establish what was to become RAF Bolt Head. This was a two-directional runway. One was east-west and the other was northeast-southwest, and this was established in 1941. The ground was cleared, the fields and hedges were flattened, coconut matting was laid on the ground, and on top of that the new system is called Summerfield tracking. This was like a metal link fencing that was laid on top of the coconut matting, and it was held down by massive steel spikes to form a very, very useful landing surface, which was officially really known as an advanced landing ground. But this was to stay in place from 1941 until 1946. By 1943, as the war was advancing, Salcombe was to become an amphibious base for the United States Navy, and the personnel arrived in 1943, in September 1943, and the Salcombe Hotel became their headquarters. They also requisitioned 60 other properties, as well as building Nissen huts on the hill, particularly all over what is now the rugby club. White Strand Quay and the slipway was cleared of all the housing, and they constructed a base and access to the estuary for the landing craft. There were 137 officers and 1,793 men which were based in Salcombe. 66 ships and many auxiliary vessels were to sail from Salcombe on the 4th of June 1944. But these craft arrived in the latter part of 1943. We've just taken off from the former RAF Bolt Head and we're heading out over Salcombe Harbour, and we're going to hear from Squadron Leader Vic Hester, who flew walrus in the area during 1943 and 44.
The trouble with the walrus was that it was designed in about 1920, and it would have faded away but for the war. It was a very strongly built amphibian which was meant to have a crew of 3. And when you even flew with a crew of 2 and landed and picked up 8 Americans, because they were always the heaviest, they were big chaps, clad in lots of clothing which was soaking wet. And by the time they got onto the aeroplane, you had to shut the windows, stop the sea coming in, because you literally only had 18 inches above the surface before you came to the window. And with all these 10 people on board, I remember trying to take off once like that, and I got as far full throttle for about 10 minutes, and I was doing 4 knots. And eventually we taxied all night and were picked up by a boat, by a motor gunboat, who transferred all the Americans on. And then I couldn't take off because I was so full of water. So we taxied on into England with some fuel brought over. Very wet, very cold, not dangerous, but we had lots of fun.
In April 1942, Winston Churchill was looking at an attempt on a limited landing in France, and it was going to be codenamed Sledgehammer. 1,000 Thames barges were requisitioned and adapted to provide a ramp at the rear end which enabled men and motor vehicles to disembark from them. These large barges were chiefly used for taking London's rubbish down to the Essex marshes for disposal. They had to be towed because they were not powered, The requisitioned barges were towed in flotillas by tugs or small steamboats to various ports in southern England for the necessary work and subsequent training exercises to take place. 5 of these such craft were towed to Salcombe for the very first of these exercises in September 1942. They were numbers 332 and 362, which, as it turned out, were bombed and sunk by the Luftwaffe shortly after arriving in Salcombe on the 19th of September. Because of the location of RAF Bolt Head, which was barely half a mile from Salcombe town, and the activity that was to ensue when the US Navy arrived with their landing craft and all the build-up for D.DAY, which naturally attracted the attention of the Luftwaffe as they were carrying out many hit-and-run raids, normally flying the Focke-Wulf 190 and also the Messerschmitt 109. And these attacks would take place on a regular basis, and I'll just read to you the dates of the various air raids that occurred on Kingsbridge and Salcombe. 20th of October 1940, 21st of April 1941 Salcombe, 25th of April 1942 Bolt Head, the 1st of May 1942 Bolt Head, the 8th of September 1942 Salcombe, the 19th of September 1942 Salcombe, the 2nd of January 1943 Kingsbridge, the 6th of January 1943 Kingsbridge, the 9th of February 1943 Salcombe, the 16th of February 1943 Kingsbridge, the 12th of March 1943 Salcombe, the 30th of March 1943 Salcombe, the 30th of March 1943 Marlborough, the 30th of March 1943 Bolt Head. During this time also, the Focke-Wulf 190s attacked, strangely, Aberdeen Gifford, and for some reason they bombed and blew up the church there, which I'll show you in some later images. Now, very often the RAF at RAF Bolt Head would be tasked with dealing with some of these intruders, and I'll read you from a diary, 12th and 13th of March 1943. A pilot identified as Deal of Squadron 266, this was the Rhodesia Squadron, intercepted and shot down a Focke-Wulf 190 over Chivelstone, which is just outside Salcombe. Then he immediately turned and chased another Focke-Wulf 190, shooting it down just as he reached the French coast. Squadron 266 was charged at the time with the prevention of these so-called hit-and-run raids, which were causing havoc in southern England. Other German planes taking part in the same raid got through and dropped their bombs in the centre of Salcombe, destroying many houses, and the casualty rate in Salcombe was extremely high for the relative to the population. One particular raid, as David Murch kindly put forward this information, bombs fell in Church Street. They demolished 3 houses on the southern side of the street, and also down below by the arch, and severely damaging houses opposite in Buckley Street. The church and houses in Island Street were also damaged and blown up. Rather interestingly, one of the areas, or the row of cottages that was blown up down at the lower end of Church Street, is now where the Over 60s Club stands. But this was in actual fact a row of terraced cottages before they were bombed during one of the raids in Salcombe. This footage is filmed late 1943, early 1944, in Salcombe itself. Looking across at Mill Bay, the landing craft are going up and down the harbour. Owen Masters, a young lad of 7, recalls on the 3rd of June 1944, I had no idea what time of the night my grandmother called me from my bed to see the most remarkable sight. Salcombe Harbour, which I could see from my bedroom, was full of red, green and white lights, all moving. This was one of the first stages of the D.DAY operation, where many south coast harbours were packed with ships and landing craft. The next day we went down to the harbour, and the ships were anchored at least 3 abreast from the harbour entrance as high up in the harbour as you could see. The ships were packed with army lorries and soldiers who were not allowed ashore. I recall them waving and shouting messages to those on the shore. Having in recent years visited Utah Beach in Normandy, where they eventually landed, I wonder how many of those men waving and shouting lost their lives there. Following 7 months of intense activity, the order to commence Operation Neptune, which was the amphibious phase of Operation Overlord, finally came. Between the 3rd and the 5th of June 1944, a US Navy amphibious force of 66 ships and 6 Royal Naval escorts sailed to join Force U of the Western Task Force. Their job was to land the 4th Division, 7th Corps US Army on Utah Beach on Normandy, and to support the landing and subsequent operations. In stark contrast to Omaha Beach, where the fighting was fierce, the Utah landings met with relatively light resistance, and thankfully losses of men and material were slight. After D.Day, the CB construction group returned to carry out landing craft repairs, and a floating dock was towed in for repair of the larger aircraft and moored off Ditch End in Salcombe. The Americans finally left at the end of the war in Europe in May 1945, taking with them fond memories of their time in Salcombe, as well as a number of GI brides. Many of the men returned to the States, but some were drafted to the Pacific. In his farewell speech, Commander Bill Hennessy said, "We will regret leaving this beautiful community. We came here as strangers, but we feel we leave as friends. You made us welcome, and your friendship is deeply appreciated. Duty will soon call us elsewhere, but Salcombe will always retain a special place in our hearts." For many years after World War II, a steady stream of veterans returned to pay a nostalgic visit to Salcombe. Those that came over after the Maritime Museum was founded in 1974 donated many of the Second World War artifacts to the collection. The town took some time to recover after the Second World War. Of the 900 evacuees, 60 still remained, and it was not until 1948 that the German prisoners of war interned in the former US Navy camp in Camperdown Road, Salcombe, returned home. The POWs replaced land girls on local farms and proved useful in the severe blizzard of 1947, when they helped to clear the snow-blocked road between Salcombe and Marlborough. Hope Cove was cut off in the same blizzard, and Salcombe lifeboat crew did sterling work supplying food and medical support to the villages. Sadly, Kingsbridge and Salcombe took a terrific hammering during the Second World War, and several properties, many houses were devastated. They were protected to some degree by the aircraft that were flying from RAF Bolt Head. The towns were also protected, as were the airfields, by a variety of anti-aircraft batteries that were set up all around the town. But sadly, these didn't always pinpoint and hit the aircraft. Mainly it was the Bofors gun. But you can see here the snow of 1947. This is post-war now, when the POWs were helping clear up the devastation. So much havoc and devastation was caused in Kingsbridge and Salcombe. It was very, very, very sad. We move away from Kingsbridge and its devastation from the bombing during World War II. We're flying over to Averton Gifford. Averton Gifford is down below, is fairly much at the tidal top end of the River Avon, and you'll see quite interestingly that the village was hit by these Focke-Wulf 190s who flew in, and believe it or not, they bombed the church. This is Averton Gifford looking towards the main village, and they flew in and bombed the church and completely devastated it. Various parts of South Devon were in ruins, but slowly but surely they began to rebuild. And as you might see in these images that come up, the church was rebuilt, not to its full glory in its heyday before the war, but it was rebuilt. as were all the shops and houses that were bombed for Salcombe and Kingsbridge, that can be seen today, where the new houses have replaced the ones that were destroyed. I really hope that you found this account interesting. It was certainly very, very interesting for me to put together, as I've lived locally for many, many years. In fact, I was born in Tavistock, but we moved to South Devon in the late 1950s, and I was at school there until I left school from Kingsbridge in 1971. So it was a long time ago, but there's been lots of changes, but it all looks a lot better than it did back in those terrible days of the Second World War. Take the greatest of care, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. All the very best. Cheers for now.